requirement. Today's video topic is going to be on the illusion of the separate self and why it controls your life. Let's go ahead and dive in. One of the deepest illusions a human being experiences is the feeling of separation. Separation from others, separation from meaning, separation from life itself, and ultimately separation from the divine. Most people never question this feeling because it appears so natural, so constant, and so reinforced by the structure of modern life that it simply becomes accepted as reality. But nearly every spiritual tradition, mystery school, and esoteric system throughout history has pointed towards the same underlying truth, that this separation is not ultimate reality, but a condition of perception. And yet, paradoxically, it is also necessary, because without the experience of separation, there could be no experience of return, no contrast, no recognition, and no conscious realization of what we actually are. From the moment we enter the world, identity begins to form. We are given names, roles, expectations, beliefs, fears, goals, and structures through which we learn to navigate reality. Gradually, a sense of me begins to solidify. At first, this is necessary because without some form of identity, we could not function in the physical world. But over time, what began as a functional structure becomes mistaken for what we fundamentally are. The personality becomes the center. Thought becomes absolute. Conditioning becomes identity. This is where the illusion begins, not because the self is entirely false, but because it is incomplete. One of the deeper esoteric truths is that separation itself serves a purpose. If there were never any sense of individuality, contrast, limitation, or forgetfulness, there could be no conscious experience of reunion. This ancient tradition repeatedly points towards this idea in different forms, that consciousness descends into limitation, fragmentation, and identification in order to eventually awaken within it. This is why so many spiritual systems describe life as a kind of forgetting, not as a punishment, but as participation. The soul enters into experience, into contrast, into density of form, so that recognition becomes possible through direct experience rather than abstraction. Without darkness, light cannot be recognized, and without separation, communion cannot be consciously realized. The problem is not the temporary experience of separation itself. The problem is complete identification with it. Over time, the constructed self begins to believe it is isolated, incomplete, and fundamentally lacking. From this perception emerges fear, comparison, endless striving, insecurity, and the constant need for external validation. This creates the modern human condition. A person begins searching for completion through achievement, relationships, possessions, status, stimulation, or control, believing that something external will finally resolve the internal sense of incompleteness. But nothing fully satisfies it, because the longing itself is deeper than the object it becomes attached to. Most desire is misunderstood. The object changes constantly, but the movement beneath it remains the same. Whether someone seeks success, love, recognition, power, knowledge, pleasure, or meaning, what they are ultimately seeking is reunion with something that feels whole, stable, and real. And the tragedy is not desire itself. The tragedy is misidentifying where desire is actually pointing. The separate self believes fulfillment exists somewhere outside itself, so it continues reaching outward endlessly, while the deeper movement beneath all longing is actually a movement back towards union. Modern life continuously reinforces identification with the separate self. Attention is fragmented. Identity is externally reinforced, and value becomes tied to productivity, appearance, status, comparison, and performance, and silence becomes uncomfortable. Stillness becomes threatening, and distraction becomes constant. This is important to understand. because the separate self survives through constant reinforcement. The moment silence appears, the deeper layers underneath begin to surface, and this is why so many people cannot sit still. Not because stillness is empty, but because stillness begins dissolving the structures they unconsciously used to maintain identity. At a certain point in life, usually through pain, suffering, loss, exhaustion, or deep existential questioning, the strategies of the separate self begin to fail. What once worked no longer satisfies, and the external search begins collapsing under its own repetition. This is often where the spiritual path begins, not because a person suddenly becomes spiritual, but because the structures maintaining unconsciousness identification begin to weaken enough for deeper questions to emerge. Who am I beneath all of this? What am I actually searching for? And why does nothing external fully resolve this longing? This is where many begin moving beyond surface level religion and into esoteric or occult traditions. Not necessarily because they reject religion entirely, but because they seek direct experience rather than inherited explanation. The mystery tradition suggests something radical, that the divine is not truly separate from us, and that spiritual practice is not about becoming worthy of communion, but awakening to the communion that was already there. This changes everything, because the path stops becoming about reaching outward towards something distant, but becomes a process of removing what obscures what has always been present. At certain moments on the path, something begins to become clear, not intellectually, but directly. There is a recognition that beneath thought, beneath identity, beneath fear, beneath all the structures that were built over time, there is something untouched, something that was present before every role, every wound, every belief, every success, and every failure. And when this is glimpsed, even briefly, there is often an overwhelming sense of familiarity, not because something new was discovered, but because something ancient was remembered. This is why so many traditions speak about union, illumination, gnosis, awakening, enlightenment, or communion with the divine. They are all attempting to describe the same essential movement, the dissolution of the illusion of separation, not the destruction of individuality, but the recognition that individuality itself exists within something greater and was never actually disconnected from it. The wave appears separate from the ocean, but it was never separate from the ocean. And this is the paradox at the center of spiritual life. The separation was never fully real, but the experience of it is necessary for conscious return. The forgetting allows the remembering to become meaningful, and the contrast allows recognition. The descent into identification creates the possibility of awakening from within it, and this is why the path can feel so painful and beautiful at the same time. Because what is breaking down is not your essence. It is the illusion that you were ever truly separate from it. The illusion does not disappear all at once. It weakens gradually through awareness, silence, contemplation, practice, suffering, honesty, and direct observation. Every moment where you observe thought instead of becoming lost in it weakens identification. Every moment where you remain present instead of escaping strengthens your recognition. And over time, something stabilizes. Less grasping, less fear, less compulsive searching, not because life becomes perfect, but because the center of identity begins shifting away from the separate self and back towards something deeper. If you have ever felt that no external achievement fully resolved the longing beneath it, if you have ever sensed that something deeper was calling beneath the surface of ordinary life, if you have ever felt moments of profound familiarity, stillness, or connection that seem more real than normal experience, then you have already touched the edge of what the mystery traditions were pointing towards. The spiritual path is not the creation of divinity within you. It never left. It is the gradual dissolution of everything that made you believe that you were separate from it. At a certain point, the search begins to change, because what once felt like a movement outward toward meaning, fulfillment, and completion slowly reveals itself as a movement back towards something that was never absent to begin with. And this realization transforms the entire path. The longing beneath every desire, every pursuit, every attempt to become more was never truly about the objects themselves, but about reunion with something deeper, something whole, something already present beneath the structures of identity and separation. And while the experience of being separate is part of what allows life, contrast, growth, and recognition to occur, the deeper truth is that the separation itself was never the ultimate reality, only a condition of perception. And as that perception begins to change, what once felt distant starts to become immediate, familiar, and quietly undeniable. Okay, you guys, that's all I have for you right now. I thought this was important to talk about because in society today we see ourselves so much as separate from everything, and we feel like we have to reach out to the divine. But one important thing that we have to remember is we were never separated from it to begin with. We were just taught that. That was our conditioning, especially, through any type of traditional religion. We're always taught that we're separate, but we never lost it to begin with. And the point is to experience contrast so that we can remember that we were never separate from it to begin with, and that we need to stop grasping for that because it's always been deep within. And if you've ever experienced unconditional love, then you absolutely will experience this non-separatist from yourself and everyone. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoy this one. I'm going to be talking about suffering in the next video. I'll see you guys later. Bye.